Hello everyone, my name is Jorge Molina. I'm an immigration lawyer, and today I have the great pleasure of talking to you about temporary protected status and deferred enforcement departure for Venezuela. We've been waiting for this announcement for several months now, and finally this week the Secretary for the Department of Homeland Security announced the opening of TPS for Venezuelans, and also the DD procedure to request work authorization permits. All right, we're going to go ahead and share our screen. Just bear with me 1 second. And let me share with you what we prepared. And here we are. All right, folks, so if you have any questions, you can either use the chat or reserve your questions till the last few minutes, and I'll be happy to address them. Please reserve any information so we can, protect your identity and give you the best advice possible. If it's something very specific, you're always welcome to schedule an appointment with us, and we can either meet in person or video conference. All right, folks. So as I was saying, I'm very excited about this. This is it's long overdue. This was frankly bipartisan grant, or should have been, but for the policies of the previous administration, it wasn't announced then. But now, thankfully, TPS has been announced for Venezuela. So today we're going to talk first. We're going to discuss the temporary protected status for Venezuelans, noting some key important dates, the requirements to apply, including what sort of convictions or actions will prevent someone from acquiring or being eligible for TPS. So we're going to talk about what sort of documents you can use to prove your case, and then the benefits of getting TPS. And we're going to do the same for DED. The last few minutes, I would also like to use some examples, right? So what would happen if you're currently in immigration proceedings, if you already have a removal order, or if you're fighting an asylum case affirmatively, right? All right, folks. So the first and most important date to keep in mind is that TPS was open on March 9th, 2021. So what is TPS? TPS is temporary protected status. It is a temporary immigration status in the United States that gives a lot of benefits. For example, eligibility for a work authorization permit, eligibility to travel, and you're considered to be in lawful immigration status while you have temporary protected status. All right, so for all those benefits to apply to you, you must apply. So the time to apply started March 9th, 2021, just a few days ago, and will end on September 5th, 2021. So it is incredibly important that if you're from Venezuela and you're interested in this, for you to apply within these 180 days. If you do not apply within that time, you will likely not be eligible for TPS in the years to come. So if you're having doubts about applying, what does this mean, or talk to a qualified immigration attorney. We're always happy to talk to you. But just bear in mind, you must comply with those dates. There are a few exceptions, but the idea right now is to apply for TPS as soon as you can. Now, the designation, meaning that the TPS designation was approved for 18 months. So it would technically end on September 9th, 2022, but most likely it will be renewed like other TPS grants have been renewed for other countries. So Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, among other countries. But for now, it will end on September 9th, 2022. So remember that. March 9th, we're eligible to apply now, and then we have until September 5th, 2021. All right, so what are the requirements? Number one, you must apply. You cannot simply say, well, I'm Venezuelan, I'm covered under TPS. You must affirmatively apply to get the benefits of TPS. Requirement number two, you must be a Venezuelan national or be an individual with no nationality that last resided in Venezuela. Regarding that, a good example of this are Palestinians. If Palestinians are born in, for example, Jordan, do not confer the citizenship of Jordan, is that they're Palestinians, but many will have moved to other countries, including Venezuela. So that's what we mean with non-citizens with no nationality. It's a very peculiar characteristic, but it does happen often. So that's requirement number two, being a Venezuelan national. Requirement number three is that you must have been present in the United States on March 9th, 2021, and demonstrate that you have resided continuously in the U.S. since that date, right? So if you were here a few days ago and you're continuing to live in the United States, you will meet that requirement. Also, and very importantly, you must be admissible to the United States. There's a few exceptions. For example, having a valid immigrant visa or reentry permits or labor certifications for certain professionals and athletes, among other grounds. But by and large, most of the inadmissibility grounds apply. So what does this mean? Well, if you have an immigration violation, let's say misrepresentation of either your visa or your intention to be in the United States, it can be waived, but you'll still be subject to that inadmissibility bar. So what this means is that if you have a troubling record, your best odds of getting TPS would be through a qualified immigration attorney. There's certain grounds that are not waivable, right? So if you committed an offense that's considered a crime involving moral turpitude, or it involves drugs, or anything that threatens national security or is related to terrorism, those cannot be waived. Also, if you have 2 or more misdemeanors, you're not eligible for TPS. So, for example, some common misdemeanors are assault convictions, driving while intoxicated or driving under the influence, depending on your jurisdiction, theft, things of that nature. So if you have 2 or more of those, you're not eligible for TPS. And importantly, if you have a conviction for a felony. So a felony under the under the federal definition is any crime for which a sentence of 1 year or more is possible. And as in most other immigration benefits, if you were a persecutor, meaning that if you subjected people to torture, you didn't allow people to exercise their religions, you were working for a government and recruiting minors for combat, you're also not eligible. Now, for other grounds of inadmissibility or conduct, there's waivers available. Notably, the waiver that would be applied here is one that is granted for humanitarian reasons, to assure family unity, or if it's in the public interest to grant it. Okay, so those were the requirements. Now, how do you show that you qualify and that you meet the requirements? Well, to establish your nationality, we could use a copy of your passport. We could also use a copy of your birth certificate and any photo ID that you might have, or any other national identification. So, for example, a cédula or a document issued to you by the Venezuelan consulate or embassy. I know that for many years now, the Venezuelan embassy and consulates are pretty much non-existent and are not really providing services to Venezuelan citizens. But, if you do have this from many years ago, we can still use it to establish your identity. But the best evidence would be your birth certificate or a copy of your passport. We also need to have evidence of your lawful entry to the United States. So if you have a stamp in your passport, or if you're issued an I-94, that would be great evidence. If you entered recently, since approximately 2014, we could also likely get your I-94 if you entered to the United States with a tourist visa. We could get your I-94 online for you, as long as you have your passport still. Now, the key here also is proving continuous residence. Now, March 9th, 2021 was just a few days ago. However, as time goes by and we need to renew the grant of TPS, continuous presence will be key to be able to secure your renewal of TPS. So what can you use to show continuous residence? So, employment records, rent receipts or lease agreements or mortgage agreements and payments, utility bills, school records, hospital records, or any other document that show that you were present in the United States at that time. We can also use bank statements or cell phone bills, things of that nature. Now, it's important to save any evidence of your presence since before March 9th, but we should at least have something showing you were here the first week of March. Now, how much does this process cost? Well, it depends on what you need. All right, so the application for temporary protected status is $85. Now, our advice is to not only apply for that, but also apply for a work authorization document if you qualify for it. However, if you're a minor, you're not interested in that, or you're a parent and you don't really want to apply for a work authorization permit, you don't have the money, you can always just apply for temporary protected status and not the work permit. If you're applying for temporary protected status and you want a work permit, the fee is $545. That includes an $85 biometrics fee that's mandatory. And it includes the cost of the application. Notably and importantly, there is a fee waiver. So there's certain reasons for which you can qualify for a fee waiver. I think that's somewhat outside the scope of this presentation, but we could certainly help you apply for a fee waiver, and we can tell you whether you would qualify or not. All right, so what does temporary protected status do, and what are the benefits, right? So first, one of the key benefits is that you're allowed to work in the United States with a work authorization permit. Now, these work permits are usually granted for 1-year periods, and as long as TPS is extended, you can keep renewing your work permit. So benefit number 1, work authorization. Benefit number 2, you're eligible to travel. Now, in regards to travel, it's somewhat tricky, and just in November, the previous administration changed some of the policies regarding travel, but based on matter of Arabelli and Yarabelli, if you accrued a lawful status in the United States, so let's say you fell out of status, you entered in a tourist visa many years ago and you overstayed, and you started accruing unlawful presence, that you have over 1 year of unlawful presence. Well, normally, if you depart the United States, you trigger a 10-year bar for coming back, and you would have to get a waiver to re-enter the United States. But if you travel with advanced parole while you are on TPS under matter of Arabelli and Yarabelli, that bar does not apply. Basically, the reasoning behind that is that if the United States gives you permission to travel, and you leave the United States based on that permission, the United States cannot tell you then that you're not allowed to come back because you accrued unlawful presence before. So that's key. Also, Citizenship and Immigration Services recently clarified that even if you have an outstanding removal order and you travel on TPS, your departure will not execute the removal order, meaning that even if you have a removal order, you could travel. So who would this benefit? Well, if you're granted withholding of removal, for example, and you're from Venezuela, you can now travel with advanced parole as long as you qualify, or you're also a TPS beneficiary. The work permits are usually valid for 1 year or until the designation expires, whichever is shorter. So most likely, the work authorization permit is going to be for about 1 year. Like I was saying, there's fee waivers available. Now, not everyone will qualify for a fee waiver. Usually is for people who are experiencing severe financial hardship, or they're going through an emergency or things of that nature. But we can certainly assess your individual situation and let you know if you're eligible for a fee waiver. Importantly, if you're granted TPS, you are not subject to removal nor detention. Now, this becomes tricky if you commit a crime that would make you not only deportable and subject to removal, but will render you ineligible for TPS. So, while having TPS would not normally subject you to detention and removal if you commit an offense, you could still be removed if your TPS is taken away from you. And then, importantly, while you have TPS, you are in lawful immigration status. Now, it's a temporary status, not meant to give you a path to citizenship, but at a minimum, it's a lawful status. This is important because to change categories or to adjust status, most people must show that they might maintain lawful status during the entire period of time that they were in the United States. All right, so those are the benefits of TPS. Now, we're going to talk about DED. So DED is somewhat different from TPS in the sense that it is controlled exclusively by the president. TPS is a creature of statute. It's a law that was passed by Congress. That's where the authority to grant it comes from. DED is granted by the president's powers over foreign policy. So the benefits are somewhat similar, but are not as vast as the ones for TPS. So the important dates for DED are January 20th, 2021. And that's the date that was announced, and it's going to be effective through July 20th, 2022. So that's when it lapses unless it's extended by the president. Now, unlike TPS, you do not need to apply for DED. DED, in effect, is a promise by the United States president to not deport an individual from Venezuela or whatever country is designated. So in this case, if you want to just be protected from deportation, you don't really need to do anything. But if you would like to qualify for a work authorization permit under that category, you would have to apply separately. Now, what are the requirements for this benefit? Very similar to TPS, you also must be a national of Venezuela. You must show presence in the United States, and unlike TPS, it's March 9th. Here, it's January 20th, 2021. That is a day after the announcement. So it's important to keep that in mind, that the date is January 20th, 2021. Also, similar to TPS, certain grounds of inadmissibility still apply. Here, the number one ground that applies are security grounds. So if you're involved in terrorism or you've done something that compromises national security, you're not eligible for this. If you have a conviction for a felony, also you're not eligible. or if you have 2 or more misdemeanors, or you were a persecutor. So persecutors, people that torture, go after people, not let them exercise their religious beliefs, things of that nature. And of course, if you were ordered deported, excluded, or removed before the announcement, you're not eligible. Also, if you were not in the United States, you would not be eligible. Or if your presence in the United States is a risk to the public or would be considered to create adverse foreign policy consequences. All right, so I think this is the more involved part. So how does this affect you or your friend or loved ones? All right, so I'd like to use some concrete examples and tell you what would help you or how this would benefit you or what strategies would be better than others in these circumstances. Again, each case is individual and unique, and before you make any decisions, I advise you to contact a qualified immigration attorney. But, for example, if you're currently applying for asylum, can you apply for TPS? Yes, TPS is not designed to limit your eligibility for any other immigration benefit. And as a matter of fact, it is encouraged that if you're fighting your, if you're requesting asylum affirmatively or defensively in immigration court, you could always request TPS. Whether your asylum case is approved or denied ultimately, it doesn't matter. You're still going to get TPS. If you're currently in immigration court already, our advice is to apply for temporary protected status as soon as possible. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that your case in immigration court will be closed. Indeed, it can proceed. An immigration judge could, in theory, issue a removal order. However, it was a policy of the United States government to close these cases administratively in the past, right? So the last administration made a lot of changes on the administrative closure front and has limited the ability to close cases through that mechanism. However, we're still waiting on the Department of Justice to announce how they're going to handle those type of cases now. And, we look forward to a change in policy. Now, the last administration just issued decisions by the Attorney General pretty much getting rid of precedent for the last 30 years. So we anticipate a decision by the Attorney General going back to the precedent and the standards before the last 4 years. So stay tuned for that, and if there's any changes and it applies to your case, we'll be more than happy to help you figure it out. Now, if you have a removal order, let's say you were granted withholding of removal instead of asylum, or you're granted protection under the Convention Against Torture in immigration court, and you want to travel. So ordinarily, our advice is to do not travel if you have a removal order, because you're going to execute your deportation order. But under present CIS guidance, it says that they will not consider it as executing a removal order if you leave with advance parole when you have TPS. So it's important that first you're granted TPS, then you're granted advance parole, and then you travel. Do not travel before any of that. And there's always risks, because when you're coming back, you're subject to the discretion of an immigration officer at the border. And we continue hearing nightmare stories about people who thought that they could travel and then they're not allowed to come back into the United States. So just be careful with that. All right, now in the case of Venezuelans, it is somewhat typical for an individual to have dual citizenship. So whether it's citizenship from Spain or or Colombia or Peru, whatever it is. The key here to determine whether you would benefit from TPS is how you entered the United States. If you entered with a Spanish passport, for example, under the visa waiver program, well, TPS wouldn't really protect you because you were not entering the United States as a national or citizen or Venezuela. Similarly, any other nationality. But if it's the other way around, let's say you were born in Colombia, but you have Venezuelan nationality and you entered the United States with a Venezuelan passport, then in that case, you would be protected by TPS. So what matters is what nationality you presented yourself as when you sought admissions to the United States. And then just an interesting point here, and just in closing, where should you apply? Now, I wanted to mention this because there's two offices to apply. So if you live in Miami, you apply in the Arizona office. And if you live anywhere else in the United States, you will apply in the Illinois office. That just highlights how many individuals from Venezuela live in Miami. So that's just a little extra there. And okay, so before I go, I also wanted to say that who would apply for DED rather than TPS? It would have to be a very unique case, and our advice is to first apply for TPS. And if it's not granted, and let's say a waiver is not granted to you for a misrepresentation, which is a ground that's still applicable for TPS but not for DED. And let's say for whatever reason the waiver wasn't granted. In that circumstance, you could apply for DED even though you were denied TPS. But those are very unique cases, and our general advice is to first apply for TPS as it confers more benefits to you, and most likely it's extended more consistently than DED. Right, so that completes the presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And let's see if we have any questions. All right. Okay, so here's a question. When can I apply? Well, you can apply immediately. Okay, there's no reason for you to wait to apply for TPS. It's open right now. The sooner you apply, the better. And should there be an issue in your case, if it's denied, you didn't include the proper fees, or your fee waiver is denied, you can use that time, that extra time that you have to refile or to fix whatever filing issue you had. So our advice is to apply as fast as possible. Okay, let's see what we have. Okay, so fees. All right, so we discussed the fees for TPS with a work permit and without one. The fees for DED is pretty much just a fee for the work permit. If you're applying for DED and you want a work permit, it would be $495. That includes the $410 for the work permit and $85 for the biometrics fee, for a total of $495. For TPS, the grant of TPS is $545, including the biometrics fee. And then our fees, well, what we're doing is that if you're an existing client, our fee is $1,000, and renewals will be $250, which you would need because ideally we're going to be able to renew this every year. Then if you're a new client, the fee is $1,500, and this does not include the fee, the government fee. But also, if you do your initial TPS and your initial client, your renewal will also be $250. But anyway, I see we have reached the 30-minute mark. I don't see any questions here. Again, if you would like to reach us, you can call us at 469-708-5800, or you can reach us by email at info@jmolinalawfirm.com. Again, my name is Jorge Molina. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.